Hey guys, Thomas the Genie here, aka Mustached, here to review the movie Firestarter. If you end up enjoying this full review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord, second to my Patreon, third to my PayPal. Any donations are greatly appreciated and will help support the channel and myself. And shilling will be reminded at the end of the review. With shilling out of the way though, let's get into Firestarter. So, I saw the trailer for this once, I believe, or twice. It wasn't that well promoted as compared to other things, but obviously this is adapted from Stephen King's book Firestarter, which also had a earlier movie in the 1980s, apparently, of the same name, obviously. I've read this book, but it has been a long time since I've read Firestarter, so I don't remember all of the details from the book. It has been way too long. I did skim through the 1980 version movie just to see how close it's movie-to-movie adaptation-wise, and it does feel like that's still pretty close-ish to the other movie. But despite that, I saw an oddity of people having the face on their trailer thumbnails on YouTube. I didn't see any of their videos, so I don't know how it's faring. I saw when I googled it that the scores weren't doing particularly well either, which I find fascinating, but I am here to be as objective as possible. Of course, me wanting to be a writer and have my works be adapted was always something I've always personally dreamed of, so I'm going to have to put my jealousy aside once again, because this is another chance of one of his works to get that attention, Stephen King, that is. So, among the books, I think this is actually one of the very few Stephen King books I've actually read a while ago, as I mentioned. But it's been too long. And again, I skimmed through the remake, and we'll start with just the beginning of this, and there will be slight comparisons, but I'm here to mainly focus on this version and how well it does. So with that out of the way, the movie begins with her as a baby being breastfed and the father looking on all happily. But the broom begins to shake and a fire begins. And during the sequence, the fire spreads to the baby's head, but this appears to be a dream as the father awakens and heads to a much older daughter named Charlie. And while she is down there with him, she talks about the bad thing. He assumes she's referring to her period, even though I'm assuming she'd be too young for that quite yet. But she refers to the other bad thing, the worst thing, if you will, according to her. So the mom joins them, so in this version the mom is alive, which I suppose is the first thing I did want to mention, because when I first started up the original Firestarter, the movie actually starts with the mother already being dead. Now I find this choice rather fascinating to actually have it take place before the mother gets killed, and sort of lean into the prerequisite of learning of, like, what happened with the mother, and in this instance I found this beginning actually quite effective here. So this movie actually starts out pretty good, all things considered. So the reason why I say that is in the first movie, the 1981, we are simply just told that this event happened, and now, for all intents and purposes, we can just simply believe that. But actually seeing it puts a different light on the situation. And it also helps us to get them to know the mom as a character as well, on top of the fact that instead of just skipping over her material in the 1980 movies, we actually get to see how she wanted to raise her child, which I do think is very important for this movie, because both parents have a very different outlook on how they want to proceed, with both knowing already that their child can light things ablaze, and apparently has other powers, which I do have an issue with that part, but we'll get to that a little bit later on. The differences being is that the mom wants to train them, sort of like, a whole X-Men thing, like, teach her how to hone her skills, which, in just thinking about that step logically, that probably would seem like the more accurate or the more logical thing to do. However, the father is opposed to this idea, but his opposing idea comes from a stigma. It comes from a bad event. It comes from him having had used his powers in the past, and it's not going well. It affecting him physically as well. So he already knows that building up that power and using it has its strengths. And I actually really like that the power in this has a very, very clear indication that there is a limit. They're setting up rules, which is very, very good in storytelling. But it does come issues with the younger girl later on in the movie. But we'll get to that, as I mentioned. But so far, again, a really solid opening, and dare I say, as far as an opening is concerned, I think it's way significantly better than the original movie. It gets us way more invested in seeing both parents, seeing how they're different, seeing, they're not immediately on the run, so the tension is higher in the original, but I feel like they're building up to that tension is much more, it creates much more of a emotional impact when you can sort of ease into that sort of situation. So, after the mom joins them, we get a little bit of a cut to show that they have been interviewed, both asked questions, both the mother and the father, in this facility. So we know that they were being questionnared, and this is in the original as well. Well, it was more of a test, rather, in the original 1980 version. So pretty close. This is more of a after the fact of questioning, who were you related to? Where do you come from? All these sorts of questions. Anyway, we see that the father's power is to mind control people, to get them to do what he says them to do. And we get to see him do this directly to this woman who has been smoking for however many years or whatever. So she says she wants to pay, and he says, hey, if, pay me once. If you don't like what the results are, feel free to, it's on the house. So he does use his power, tells her that smoking's the worst thing ever, mentally, so that now that's what she's projecting outward. And indeed, she does feel better. So he's using his power for good. And I like that his power is blocked within himself. I don't like it that it proceeds into his daughter later on in the movie, though. I feel like that does cheapen a little bit of the latter events that happen in this movie. And I don't remember. I know that's not. I don't remember if that's a thing in the 1980s. Like I said, I sort of skimmed through that movie, so I don't remember if she has his powers too in that version. But whatever. Point being, as I mentioned, when she leaves the woman, we see the toll it takes on him bleeding through the eyes. Again, really effective material. It's showing that his powers have consequences, and I think that's super important. When powers have consequences, you can understand where he's coming from. It's not as simple as, well, we can just train her and that's the end of that. No, there is a limit. There is, that stigma, as I mentioned. Again, this movie's beginning is really, really strong. It's so good, and I feel like they ruin it in the ending, which we're gonna get to. But I would say ruin in a. I think overall this movie's pretty good overall, but I would say there would be some minor changes I would make to the middle-ish and ending part. And the end, like I said, very insignificant changes I feel like could easily keep it in tow with, having the power sets be separate. And I think that would be much more effective in this, considering the book is called Firestarter. Her power should be just fire related. I feel like that's a pretty simple thing to stick to. But we'll get more into that later on. So again, really strong opening. I'm really enjoying this movie so far. Let's see. So after that, we cut to her in class. So she's trying to live a normal life. They're currently in frog dissection class, so I don't know when this movie takes place, because I don't know if classes still do this, where they do the whole frog dissection thing. I don't know, I shrug. So, the boy next to her calls her weird, and because of what she's saying, she's like, she doesn't use like phones or like technology, and this is an indication that she's poor, which kind of spreads out through the class. And she almost uses her power, but she uses this trick that her father taught her to look at certain objects and just point them out, focus on them. We see it earlier in the movie when she's about to do it, and here as well. So she manages to avoid using to catch something on fire. We see little glimmers of like specks of fire, but we see them snuff out. So, as I mentioned, we know that the family is poor, which is also, again, connected to the other version. And we also learn here that the mom also hates her power. Now, we don't get too much information about this in particular, comparatively, unfortunately. I would have liked to have known a little bit more of what she means when she says she hates her powers, but wanted to teach Charlie how to use her power. I think that would have been a little bit neat to have that here, just added on. So, a little bit of a missed opportunity, I feel like. Unfortunate. Anyway, we cut to her, back to Charlie, into dodgeball class. She's doing pretty well, but she gets hit in the head, back in the head, by the same boy who called her weird earlier. And, of course, she gets angry again, but this time she runs off, like she's unable to focus as much as she was earlier. As she runs into the bathroom, we see the water turns into steam. We see, eventually the teacher head in, trying to, make sure she's alright. The water is hot, the fire burst out, and she eventually has to call, people, make sure everything's all good. We got back to the father, who calls his ability the push. Now, this is what they refer to it in the 1980 version, and I'm going to assume that's what they also call it in the book, since that's the direct phrase that they use in both versions, I assume. Um, and of course, naturally, the father is also scared that his daughter will be taken away. But Charlie overhears their conversation between the mother and father about what exactly to do. Whether that, again, to be training her or having her hold her powers, back as much as conceivably. So he wants to leave this town. And at this point, after what she has done, she thinks she's a monster. And then in the process of, freaking out, she burns her mom, which is 1-to-1 of, again, where we see sort of a flashback in the 1980 version where she burns the mom. We see this here as well. And we see her in this call the police, but she doesn't respond. We cut to the bad guys. I forget what they're called. The something, or rather, the FDA or whatever their group name is. And we can see them in orbit, looking down at the heat signature. So they make contact with a man named Branburn or something like that. I just called him the Mind Man for simplicity's sake, since he has a very similar power to the dad, apparently. But he's called up to take in the task and bring this young girl in alive. Meanwhile, the dad bandages up her mom as much as possible. And we can see that they both, even after that event, they both are still, holding on to their values. The mom still wants for her to be trained so that something like this doesn't happen again. And the father wants to continue to hold it back so literally it doesn't happen again. So it's unfortunate on both ends, regardless, because again, they created the rule that if you overexert yourself, that, you will hurt yourself in the process of doing it. They want to, try to do that. Anyways, the mom gets jump scared by the police showing up, and she excuses the police call that they received by saying, "Oh, my daughter, set fire to the stove," or something along those lines, showing her burns and saying that that was what happened. So, the man the Mind Man, as I referred to him as, suddenly and abruptly appears in their home. I'll admit that that kind of just rushes along the movie to be like, oh, he's just here now, okay. So the mom, she has a separate power from the other, from the father. She has telekinesis, so she's trying to throw objects at this man, and he's, she's not doing a very good job. She hasn't used her powers as much. And he proceeds to hold up the daughter while the father is on the other end. Charlie, in a desperate attempt to get out of this situation, bursts out a whiff of flame in each direction. This unfortunately kills the mother in the process, knocks the man out, as well as knocking the father out for a little bit as well. We cut to the bad captain going to Old Man Joseph's house to try to convince him, the man who started all of this in the process, to get back in it, because he's not been in it, the workings of what they've been doing for a while now. And he says essentially the same thing of like, no, I've seen what this leads to, fuck that shit, I'm out. Kind of the loose interpretation, if you will, of what he essentially gets down to saying. Anyway, we see that Charlie begins to focus on using her power. When I say her power, I mean her mom's power in particular, throwing off an object using telekinesis. So, I don't know, I feel like this is where the movie starts to get a little bit weird. That she has both of her parents' powers and her own set of powers. I feel like having her have 3 sets of powers just overindulges her abilities that aren't necessary at all. I mean, she could have just caught fire on the object. That's all they had. That's the only difference they had to do. And I'm going to say that again for something later on in the movie. That's all they had to do was transfer it to something that relates to fire. I feel like that's the only change I would make to the movie in terms of how to use her power to keep it so that it's isolated from her parents, because I feel like having her also obtain her parents' powers kind of weakens the movie a little bit. Anyway, I wouldn't say it's by a significant degree, but it's definitely a degree that's noticeable at the very most. Anyway, speaking of her using her powers, she gets bit by a cat and she burns the cat in the process. The cat, after being burned, is still alive, and the father says, you know, it has to be your decision to use your powers, and you have to finish what you started as well. It's essentially what he says here, saying that you need to put the cat out of its misery, so she does so, and of course she's sad about it, but, you know, it was an unfortunate circumstance that led to something really cruel happening. As they place the cat to rest, she sends a little prayer out for her mom as well. And we cut back to old man Joseph, who again says that she can be a weapon, which is 1-to-1 to what this character is in the 1980 version. However, the chief bad woman says that she wants to, like the mother, wants to train her. Whatever that means in their version of train her. And the old man says it's better off just to kill her. So, again, why they're on the run in the first place. And this is the part of the movie where the father begins to finally explain what the mom wanted in terms of what she meant by training her. So he uses his powers of mind control to get them a ride. She hears voices in the distance or senses something. Again, powers that I feel like I think they were in the 1980 version again. I skimmed through the movie, so I don't remember. I think she has this. Yeah, she does. I remember. She knows of when they're coming exactly. It feels like a little bit overpowered, I guess, is where this movie starts to come on, you built really good rules. Giving her more and more powers seems to block the things that you're saying about the father. And I feel like that's a bit unfair. And I could even criticize the original work if it was like that. I'm not sure. The book I'm referring to, that is. They get a ride eventually to this old cabin with this old couple. She eventually stumbles upon this old woman in bed, and she sort of like literally falls into the area. So this is where, when breaking apart from the old man, Charlie then promises not to hurt bad people. And it shows the flashback of the father at this point, after her saying that, making this promise, of him using his powers when he initially went to go get her from, the group. And after the fact, he states that even though they did a wrong, he is also aware that these people also have families, and that they are also hurt by the things that, when you hurt an individual, it has a ripple effect. And I actually really do like that, making sure that, violence for violence sake isn't always as simple as that is the end-all be-all, that can, there's a ripple effect that can occur, and I'm glad they put that in the movie, because, that's true. It can be true, I should say. So, I lost my place in my notes. So this is where he makes her update the promise not to hurt anyone with the fire. And again, he literally says, because we don't want it to have a ripple effect, we don't want it to affect other people's lives outside of the people you're initially hurting. So she does so. Meanwhile, we cut back to the old man who gets the news and hears about them having escaped. That happens in the other movie as well. And he decides to stick up for them after that, drunk as he is, and trying to get the police who get called in by him to leave. As the police move in, she starts a fire, and we see on the outskirts of the land on the other side of the street, one of the cops gets shot by the Mind Man, who kills the rest of the police there. And Charlie at this point wants revenge. Now, I want to keep that one a note because, again, I don't feel like that from her wanting revenge here to where we see them at the end of the movie, I don't feel like there's enough time for her to get from this point to where they are at the end of the movie. So yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more too. So Charlie, hold on. So Charlie's father, stays behind to make sure that she can run off. So he's trying to use his powers against the other Mind Man, but the agents get to both of them and take the father down, and they have the special eye things that help them prevent them from being affected by their powers. Because it correlates with the eyes. Every time we see them use their powers, people's eyes dilate open up to indicate that they're being manipulated, at least from the mind powers. So, at this point in the movie, Charlie is now off on her own. She's in the forest, while the evil captain, is talking to the father about trying to bring in, make sure the daughter gets here and stuff like that. While Charlie's living off the land, off of berries and water and drink. So, we assume, since we see the DSI building, the building where he's been moved, being shown to her, that she assumes that this is her father telling her, but it's the Mind Man getting to her, telling her where to go, apparently. So distance is a thing I am curious about, because I don't know what the distance is that they're able to manipulate each other. And I guess he doesn't have to see them, question mark? I don't know. Again, the movie starts to break its rules here at the end of the movie, so it gets weaker and weaker as we progress. Charlie starts to focus and train her powers, as her mom sort of alluded to, making sure she can start a campfire to, to mind control things. So when we cut to her in the streets, she gets stopped by these 3 bullies, and she mind controls all 3 of them to get their food, or one of their food, one of their clothes, and one of their bikes, as she proceeds to just sort of move forward. Again, I feel like the scene kind of diminishes more than it helps, which is sort of the entire third act of this entire movie, unfortunately. So the worker, when she arrives at the building, she gets to this worker who is trying his best to get out of the situation. He eventually pulls out a gun when she was like, hey, you don't have a gun, right? And he says no, but he does. So she burns him, doesn't kill him, so she, with the cat thing, she finishes the job as the father kind of told her to do. She gets all the way to her father, but the evil captain, is with the father, and the father looks at her and manipulates his daughter into, or not yet, but Charlie claims she will burn herself first, while, the captain's trying to persuade. This is when he forces her hand. He controls her to burn everything down, including him, in the process of getting out of the situation. Burn the whole place down. So she begins to do so. She unlocks doors with her powers, question mark? I don't know how that even works. That doesn't have to do with people, so I'm not sure how that one works. And again, she could just burn off the door. Again, you can keep it in the framework of her power. I'm not sure why they felt needed to give her extended powers. It feels like, again, it's breaking away from the moves and even if that's the case in the 1980 version, and even if the book, well, I'm sorry to say, then the book isn't that great in the end. Wow, shocker that I would say that, but sometimes, I think you need to make necessary changes, especially when you set the rules, and you set them so fucking well in the beginning. So yeah, there we go. So, she gets to use her mind powers, she gets to use her fire powers, but they start wearing fireproof suits at this point, and this is where the Mind Man makes his appearance once again. And he kneels down to her, kind of like saying, like, I give up, you can do whatever you want to me. She just sort of, like, walks by him and then lets the building burn, and then he somehow survives and just joins her and then carries her off. Okay, that's a fucking ending. Fuck that shit, man. What the fuck was that? There's no indication from her wanting revenge earlier in the movie to being like, yeah, I'll let you go. I don't know. Because she was still in the building, being mind-controlled by her father to burn it all. That would include him. It doesn't make any sense. They didn't follow she didn't follow his instruction, to the degree that he set out for her to do, so I don't know. I just feel like it fell apart at the end, and the ending is kind of shit. But I mean, for what it's worth, again, I think the beginning of this movie is so strong, and I feel like it's such a missed opportunity. From just how they set up the powers, the limitations, understanding our characters. They did so much work, and it kind of just fell apart. So this is an indication where the ending of the movie unfortunately ruins the rest of the movie because of how well it was done. It always sucks to get across a movie quite like this. And again, I'm always someone who, if you stick around for my reviews, I like to give out advice as myself a writer who, again, who's always wanted to have their own books adapted to movies someday, somehow, somewhere, somewhen. Anyway, I think you should definitely follow the beginning of this movie's sort of template if this is the type of story you want to do. Think about, what are the rule sets, making sure that for everything that is given, there has to be something that can be taken away. For every action, there is a reaction. For every thing you do, there is a consequence or a thing that is good. If the thing that is, like the smoking part, doing a good for a person, for example. These are all examples of, like, things you can pay off through the setup of the beginning of your writing of a story like this. Getting perspectives that are differing and, having the relationship still function, and understanding where those slightly altered biases can come from, like the father character in this book, or movie, I apologize. Setting all that up. And another important factor, as I preluded to throughout this review, is when you have something like powers, make sure, it's very easy for the powers, as indicated here, to sort of start to lose its luster in terms of, like, they just sort of stack more powers on her individually throughout the movie. And I feel like that does rob the agency of the powers you are very trying to indicate by the title of your book or movie in this case. It's called Firestarter. I don't know. I think if you're gonna write that story, you should, and the point of it is she has the ability to use fire. There are different ways to use fire, from good ways, like setting the campfire, to destructive ways, like burning the cat and burning the guy, and burning things that, you can think to burn. Maybe perhaps a camera, instead of just turning it off magically with some other power that isn't fire related, nor does it seem to be related to either of her parents' powers, ? Yeah, that might be something to change, or to not have. Or again, you can alter it to be fire related, and that's all you would have had to have done to keep it concise within the framework of, okay, this is her power, fire, and this is how we're going to make sure she, that there's a level cap, aka where the father is, like, when he uses his powers, he kind of bleeds through the eyes. Maybe have that for her, too, maybe even. Just to show, like, hey, there is a consequence to using the power that much. To give him a little bit more, for both parents to have both of their perspectives have a bit going for them, except, instead of it leaning a lot closer to just the mom. I feel like having that scaling creates much more impact. It creates the harder choice, and it makes us relate more to the character by doing it, by making us question, well, which way do we go? Which way, do we push it? Push the power? How much do we push the power? When you write that way, when you create a role and stick to it, you actually open up yourself to more dynamic, to more challenges that your character can overcome or to deal with. And that is not represented in this movie, unfortunately. If I were to give this movie a complete score, I'd probably have to stick to a 5 out of 10. And the highest I would probably go is a 6, but probably stick to a 5. And again, I think that 5, the reason it's that high is because of how strong the opening is, but how much falls apart throughout the other half of the movie from that point to the end. Unfortunately, that's what leaves it to stick to a 5, is that a lot of the movie kind of just falls apart at the ending half of this movie. So, again, really strong opening, really terrible ending. Overall, I'd say, it was okay, but I could definitely see where this movie could have easily been improved. But if you enjoyed this review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head over to my Discord, second to my Patreon, third to my PayPal. Any donations are greatly appreciated. Until next time, everyone, bye-bye.